Hello everyone, and what we're going to be doing today, this is week 13, is I want to talk a little bit about what we're going to be doing the next couple weeks. As everyone knows, we are going to be going in finals mode, which basically means that I want everyone to focus on their final project. Hopefully everyone's animation is getting close to being finished, or it's something that you can work on today, but I would prefer that you have a good 2 weeks to work on your final. And if you get started this Wednesday, you should have a pretty good chance to be able to have those 2 weeks. Now, in terms of what we're going to, in terms of the final again, for those of you who do need to see it, it can be found in the announcement area over here, basically just all your different options. Again, you could go with a mid-level modeling asset. You can go with something that's sculpting, and again, we're going to be talking about that today. You can try to do another interior if you want. You could try to do modeling clothes and props. That one, again, I'd prefer that you talk to me about paint over, which is basically the technique of taking a 3D model and going into Photoshop and painting over it. I'm going to be leaving a tutorial for that. Hopefully you'll find that helpful. Or if there's something you want to focus on, you could do that as well. I'm going to be blunt. The assignment that I would usually recommend would either be creating a mid-level a sculpt or modeling another interior or exterior. So let's take a look at what has been done so you have an idea of how far you can approach this. So one project that someone has done is they actually focused their efforts in making a Stargate like what we're seeing over here. Another one, someone took some time to make an interior like this. I believe we have another picture for that too. They mostly focused on just that one area itself. And I was okay with that because they put a lot of time and effort into this. They took a long time to do the texture work and all this other stuff. So it definitely was worth the time and effort. We'll get back to that one. Another person did an office like what we're seeing over here, looking pretty interesting. And again, the texture work is top notch. All the little details that we can see here are put in, so that's great. Here's another one where the main focus was just doing this little dial that's over here. And that is an assignment for another class, so sorry about that. But that's pretty much the long and short of everything. Now this is actually taken from a Sculpt, where someone actually made a very simple base mesh and basically tried to replicate that model the best that they could. Again, they basically made a 2D reference and just kind of went to town on it. And this is, again, our main focus for today, so that everyone can have a chance to see that. So let's actually begin in terms of this sculpting process. Now, one thing to kind of keep in mind when you're doing sculpts, unlike what we've been teaching previously, is we're basically going to be going into a situation where we're going to be focusing on not so much a low poly count, but a high poly count. So I'll show you some of the basics that we can get into right now, the stuff that's specifically going to help you for this assignment so you can approach this well. So first off, I'd highly recommend going into the smooth. And this is going to be one of those situations where we actually want a high poly count for this. But before I go any further, I'm going to turn off my soft selection. And I would strongly recommend turning on your poly count that's over here. I usually keep this on by default. You can get this turned on by going to display and heads up display. And there should be an option here called poly count. You just turn this on and you'll be able to see everything that's over here. That's going to be kind of important for us. So here's the number that's total for faces, and this is whatever is selected. So currently we have about 1,500 faces in here. So I'm going to add another division. So now it's basically 6,000. Another division, that's going to be 24,000. Another division, that's going to be 99,000. And I'm going to add one final one. And that should put this to a very high poly count. We're talking about 400,000. That should be enough for our needs when it comes to the actual sculpting process. But to get started with this, I'm actually going to get started by going with a bit of a lower poly count. We're going to put this to about 3,000 to get started. Now, when you get into the sculpting process, one thing that's going to help you out greatly is basically setting your form first. You'll find that a lot of the stuff that needs to be done is going to make things a little easier if you basically make the form. So say like we want to make something similar to a head. We're not going to make the head exactly yet. There is something we're going to use for that later. But the way that we're going to get started in terms of sculpting this is we're going to be using this little option over here. This is what's called the pull. If you double, and by the way, make sure that your object's selected when you do this, then double click so that we can get into our little tool that we have over here. Now the way that this is set up, the size is basically the size of your brush. If I click and drag this left to right, the brush will get bigger. Careful that you don't make it too big or too small. If I hold down B, let's see. Just remember, undo is your friend. Yeah, let's just put this back to 0.5 for now. Okay, cool. The strength is basically how much is going to be pulled. So for the pull, the 100 is actually not too bad. Oh, also heads up, you probably are going to want to make sure that the symmetry is turned on for that. It is going to make your life a lot easier. And yeah, I can just basically pull this out like so. When it comes to the brush, you might actually want to make it a little bit bigger than necessary. It will make this easier. Yeah, so there we go. I'm able to pull this down and over. And I could basically just readjust and change this however necessary. So yeah, if you're going to be doing the main sculpting first, you usually find that this little pull option can be a great start. But it's a good idea to kind of put this at a lower poly count first. Not too low, but at least low enough that you can see a little bit of what the end result's going to be. And that's basically what we're seeing here. There we are. Cool. Okay. Then, once that's done, I can put in an area for the nose. By the way, neat little trick. If you hold down Shift while you're doing anything, you'll be able to do something called smoothing. If an area gets a little bit too ambitious, I guess is the best way to say it, or not so much ambitious, but if it gets a little bit polygony, the smooth can help you with that. Big thing that's going to help you later. Okay, but this is again just basically using the pull and the size and the strength. Not too, oh, and the symmetry. So don't forget those. Now, if I want to do some basic sculpting, in other words, just basically move elements around, or just kind of bring this up like a brush or clay, I could change the brush size to 0.3 maybe. Let's see. There we go. And I can just click and drag. Oop, that is way too strong. Undo's your friend always. 0.5. Oof. This is why experimentation is always an important thing to do, and always important to make sure that undo button is at the ready. What I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to add some eyebrows here. By the way, holding down Control will make indentations like this. So I'm kind of making an alien-like thing at this point. But again, just regular button over here, just click it and drag and bring things out. Holding Control brings things in, as you can see. Holding Shift smooths things out. Bit of a heads up when you're doing this, by the way. While the poly count's low, it's much easier to smooth things out. Once the actual poly count's higher, it does get far more challenging. So not too shabby so far. Now, say that this area is looking good, but both sides could be pushed in a little bit more this way. This other option that's over here, this is your pinch option, and basically once clicked and dragged, it basically pinches an area so that those areas are a little bit closer in like that. Yeah, there we go. Now this one I've almost never need to use on anything organic, but you might find a use for it. This is the flatten option. What this will do is it'll basically take an area like so and flatten that out a little bit more depending on the direction you're going in. Could be useful if you're trying to do inorganic elements. Yeah, like you can already see it's getting a little bit smoother over here, but since I'm doing an organic dude or character, that might not be so useful. This next area over here, this is a little bit of a blobbing effect, or foaming effect, I'm sorry, which if I, always remember to check your strength. 0.05 I think would be a good one. But yeah, this basically foams up an area like this. Now it's going to make a lot more interesting once we actually get a higher poly count for this, but it just brings these areas up little by little. I got to admit, that's mostly what you're going to need for now. The only other area that I could see may or may not be useful is the freeze option. What the freeze does is it literally paints an area that maybe you want to not move. So for example, what if I want to move this area up? Well, I'm clicking and dragging around like so, and now the next time I bring this up, I won't accidentally move this area by mistake. So that could be a good thing. To get rid of this, hold Control. Yeah, looks like that's not going to be getting rid of anytime soon. Let's see here. Oh, yeah, you have to hit this again. Yeah, when you have to get rid of one of these, always remember to hit the little freeze again, then hold Control, and then it gets rid of it. Yeah, there we go. When you're doing sculpts for the eye, it does actually help out quite a bit. You can also use the flood to basically get the whole shebang, and then Control to just change only what's necessary. So, say I want to change this. Well, I can do that with relative ease with what I just did there. And then I could just double click. I could unfreeze all. And that's pretty much it. So that's basically how that would work. Now, if I went into, again, a higher poly count, which I'm going to do, simply by selecting the mesh itself, and this is the way I'd recommend it. Once you're ready to turn that to a higher amount, I can just go to the divisions, and again, I can hit 5, because that's as high as I want this to go. You do not want this to go any higher than this. You can already see there's some stuff that's going on here, and that definitely does not help. So, and if it doesn't look good, well, then you can try to use a regular smooth again, because as you saw before, looks like we're having some problems. But if I hit smooth this way, yeah, it looks better. But you have to keep track of your poly count when you're doing this. So in this case, I'm just going to add 2. Yeah, there we go. And just like that, my mesh has 500,000 polys. And I can now, should I wish to, put in some lips. Now I'm going to show a lot of this again once I actually show how to sculpt the person. I'm going to try to get the general shape. But as I said before, you got to be careful, because once you actually add that high poly count, it does tend to make things much more tricky. But I can use the pinch area over here to, ooh, that is way too high. I'm trying to pinch out the lips a little bit so I can, that's still a little high. So 0.25, yeah, there we go. So I'm using the pinch to basically bring this part of the lips together like so, and then I could use the pull to shape up this part of the lips. And with a little bit of ingenuity, you can actually get some very interesting looks for your characters. Now, if you didn't want to have empty sockets in there, well, you could always go back to your polygons. Basically, I went from my polymodeling to sculpting. That's basically how I have this. But you can go back to polymodeling at any time. And then, if I wanted this in alien, I probably could just keep it like so. But most likely, I'm going to have to go to my polysphere. Put this as a radius of 0.25. Yep, there we are. And then I could basically paint this up a little bit. But again, this is basically the, oop, do not want that. This is again how you can get started. Now again, I'm going to review a lot of this in the next video, but I'm hoping this will give you an idea of how you can do the sculpting before doing the real thing. Oh, by the way, neat little trick. When you're done with your eye, and I'm just going to rotate this so it's a little easier to see, although admittedly a little freaky. If I go to my channel box layer edit, the modeling toolkit, and select W, aka the move tool, I could actually duplicate what I have here, put a negative value over here, and this will go directly to the other side. Now, of course, this is all dependent on you making sure that you keep your model directly in the center. So that's pretty much what I wanted to show, at least in terms of the basics of sculpting. I got some other tips that'll help you out. Pretty much everything that you see here is complete freeform, so that's basically the way that I have this at this point. It's usually not the best way to go. It's always good to have a reference if you can. So let's actually take one that actually has a proper reference, and I'll give you some tips and tricks that'll hopefully help you along the way. So that's the end of video 1, and we'll go to video 2 very shortly.